Joining me now is John Hofmeister, former president of Shell Oil and the founder and chief executive of Citizens for Affordable Energy. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks, Edie.
You know, I was out driving today in Pennsylvania, actually, and I had to fill up the car, which was painful, because I realized that just filling up your car with gas, it's increased about $15 in just the past year. You take a look at Libya now, a source of oil. Now we don't know what's going on there. You take a look at Japan, which, if it doesn't go back to nuclear energy at the level that it was, will probably be going to oil even more. And you wonder, how does this impact us?
Well, Edie, we have a serious problem now, and it's going to get worse over the next 2 to 3 years as the demand for fossil fuel, that is crude oil, increases because of China and India, which are nearly going to double their consumption over the next 5 to 6 years. The problem now is the turmoil in the Middle East and the tightening supply is driving up the crude oil price. The average family in the United States is going to have to pay or have to choose whether they buy gas or whether they buy other things. The biggest problem that families face is what choices to make. But gas is not going to come down anytime soon unless we go back into recession and the demand destruction sets back in. I'm afraid we're in a high oil price period.
Well, what can possibly bring that down? You know, we've taken a look at expanding our sources of energy. I live in Texas. You know, I can tell you that I've gone past the West Texas wind turbines. I lived through those 110-degree, solid sunshine summers. Yet it doesn't seem that our country as a whole has really gotten on board with the, wind and solar energy.
We have no energy plan in this country, and we haven't had for decades. Wind and solar are not answers to the energy requirements of the future at this stage of their evolution. In other words, it's inefficient, and it's only sporadic forms of energy. Only when the wind blows, only when the sun shines, and it does nothing for crude oil, which is used for personal mobility, for transportation. And so we can do all the wind farms and sun farms we could imagine, but it doesn't help the price of gasoline, which is a very serious problem.
Meantime, you brought up China. I had heard that China is planning ahead, that they have gone and they have found sources for their oil, that they've either purchased the rights to it or purchased the opportunity to get the oil from various sources. Have we done any of that? If we're not going to drill here, have we figured out where we can go and get it other than the Middle East?
The answer is no. We're completely trusting the availability of the global trading market, which is going to get smaller because you're absolutely right. China has a strategic plan as to where its crude oil is going to come from, which countries. They put $110 billion of loans out there for countries like Venezuela, Russia, Nigeria, Ghana, Kazakhstan, and others. And they're going to make sure their supplies aren't going to come out of the global trading pool, so that pool is going to be diminished, which means we're facing even higher prices. In fact, I believe we're facing shortages by the middle of this decade.
But do we have the oil resources here in the United States that we could capitalize on? And do we have then the refining capacity?
We absolutely have the reserves. The president misleads the public when he says we only have 2% of the reserves. He's using a very narrow definition of oil ready to produce. We have the resources in the ground. I testified in Congress a month ago. If we raised our production 3 million barrels a day to 10 million barrels, and we use 20, we could produce half of our oil instead of a third of our oil. We'd create 3 million jobs, and we could sustain that increased production for many decades into the future.
I can hear the frustration in your voice. You testified before Congress a week ago, and for the next 5 years, I'm sure they'll be studying that testimony and then putting it out to committee to study. Let me turn to Japan again, because of course, we're following moment by moment what's happening with their nuclear facilities there. If they cannot go back to nuclear power, or they feel that it is simply not safe, reliable, whatever, and they go to oil, where do they get that? If you've got a country like Japan with that consumption needing oil right away, where do they go, and what does that then do to the supply and our cost for it?
They first go to Saudi Arabia, where they have long-term contractual relationships with Saudi Aramco oil company. They also go to Malaysia. They go to Brunei. They go to local sources. You try to get oil from the nearest sources you can to cut down on the transportation costs. Those are sources which will take oil out of the global trading market, which is going to make what's available to us, again, there's going to be less of it, and it's going to be more expensive. So shifting to fossil fuels in Japan is going to cost the world higher prices, not just for oil, but natural gas, liquefied natural gas as well.
All right, if you have to put on your cap and see into the future, a year from now, you're filling up your car with gas. What do you expect to be paying a gallon?
This time next year, I'd say in the $4.25 range.
And a year after that?
By later, in 2012, probably very close to $5 a gallon, unless we could do something in this country to either produce more oil or change people's driving habits, which is very unlikely because we don't have mass transit systems in this country to really change effectively driving habits.
Absolutely. You've got to get to work, you've got to get to school, and life goes on. We're going to have some pretty difficult decisions, it seems like, coming up. Thank you so much for joining.